Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Finneran's Wake. I am, with everlasting commitment to the cause of great conversation, your faithful friend and host, Daniel Finneran. Thank you so very much for joining me today. If, dear friend and listener and viewer, you find these conversations enlightening, edifying, entertaining, stimulating to the mind, or nourishing to the soul, please do consider subscribing to this channel. It's a small but growing community of inquisitive minds and fearless thinkers, among whom, I can assure you, yours belongs. For content specific to mindfulness, wellness, philosophy, literature, and sleep, please visit my sister project, Pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A, by Daniel Finneran, available on all the podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. My guest today, of whose writings, opinions, and commentary I simply can't get enough, is the great John Banks. John is a journalist, an author, an editor, a sports reporter who's held roles at ESPN, Yardbarker, and the Dallas Morning News, and a Civil War aficionado. His Civil War blog and Facebook page, to which I'll be sure to include links in the show notes below, are visited by thousands of people who delight in John's erudition and his wit. His most recent book, The Civil War Road Trip of a Lifetime, is available for purchase at your local reputable bookseller. And I'm convinced that no bookshelf is complete without John's fine work on it. And with that, John, I extend to you my sincerest thanks for agreeing to join me today.
Wow, that's a tremendous introduction. Well, so anytime that you mention sleep, I may have to go check out that. What was that called again? I'm sorry. One more time.
So I'll be sure to send you a link. It's Pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A,
Okay.
which is a Greek word meaning breath. But yeah, on that channel, I post all sorts of meditations, mindful exercises, and like bedtime stories, usually of great works of literature, just excerpts of them for maybe 30 minutes in a very soporific voice.
If it puts me to sleep, I think that would be good as a person who battles insomnia a little bit. I think that that's very intriguing to me, and you immediately piqued my interest when you said that, Daniel. So I will definitely check that out. So
Yeah, to what do you attribute your insomniac tendencies? We talked off camera. You're like me. You're a very mellow person. You have your and you're accompanied by your candle and your wine tonight.
Yes. Well, the reason I'm mellow now is probably because of the wine. My wife would not say that I'm mellow, Daniel, whatsoever. In fact, last night she said that I'm wound tighter than a golf ball. So you didn't nail that description there of me quite right, I guess. But yeah, I'm mellow because of the wine and my candle burning up to the right hand side here right now. So, but I attribute the insomnia to cell phone, the phone, obviously my iPhone, which is another appendage, unfortunately, and I think society would be better off if we found a way to chuck our phones somewhere else, in a river, a lake, whatever. I think we'd all be better off. So
yeah,
that's just my opinion. So
in many ways, I agree with you, especially having lived a life. We can almost date it BC and before cell phone and
yes.
AD. Having lived a life in both ways, I think overall, in the final analysis, maybe the life lived prior to the advent of the cell phone may have been better. I will give you these two little tidbits of advice if the cell phone is the issue when you're preparing for sleep. And that is, number one, to get yourself a good pair of blue light blocking glasses. You maybe have heard about these, but in the evening hours, they're especially useful just to try to block some of those blue rays that are coming through the eyes, because what they do is they sort of stimulate a response that tricks your brain into thinking that it's still daylight and that you need to be awake, and then your melatonin that is produced internally is actually dampened. And another thing is, try, if possible, for the hour preceding your bedtime, to just shut off all screens. I know it's difficult. We usually fall asleep with with the screen on our chest as we're lying down or in our laps. Or, you're looking at your television screen on the wall. But if you can do that, and maybe just start by doing it 30 minutes in advance of bed and then 1 hour in advance of bed, it does make a big difference. And there's some other tricks that you can employ as well. We'll have to talk about them later.
Yeah. Do a podcast. We get superior advice. I feel like I have to pay you now. That's awesome. I love that. That's tremendous. Let's do it. Yeah.
No, those
Excellent.
are just two simple things. We'll have to put something behind the paywall, then you can
totally. You got to do that.
So in my introduction, I described you as being a Civil War aficionado, and this term aficionado, which I love, it's a marvelous one, of whose etymology the great Ernest Hemingway, in his first book, The Sun Also Rises, gives a memorable account. It comes from the Spanish word afición, which means a great passion or a fondness, almost to the point of zealotry. So tell me, John, what is the source of your Civil War afición, your Civil War passion? How and when did it begin to develop?
That's a great question. Actually, and I write about it in the book. It was many years ago. And this is not an atypical story. I'm from Western Pennsylvania, grew up in suburban Pittsburgh. So a long time ago, took a family vacation to Gettysburg. My dad happened to walk into a place on Baltimore Street, which was there until, believe it or not, last year. It was torn down to make way for another place. But it was like one of those tourist traps. And he went in there and purchased a sleeve of real Civil War bullets. And I have two siblings that are both younger than I am, a sister and a brother. And they weren't interested. And my dad gave them to, quote unquote, us, but they ended up with me. And in the book, I describe them as the three little demons that partially led to my interest in the Civil War. And then, that was when I was 13, and that was a long time ago. But somewhere in my office here behind me, those three little demons are somewhere on one of the shelves, and the shelves behind me, Daniel, are filled with Civil War artifacts and artillery shells and books and all kinds of stuff. So that kind of started it. And then it just mushroomed from there. I became a journalist. I think the foundation, if you want to be a good journalist, is curiosity. And I'm a very curious person. I like to ask questions. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a long-time journalist. And for most of my career, I was an editor. Only have really branched out to writing in the last 10 years. And, I've used all the knowledge that I gained as an editor and working with really terrific writers over the years, all that stuff, the curiosity, the working with great journalists kind of just led to where I'm at now. And that's not A to B, B journey explanation for you there, but there's a lot of stuff that happened in between. But that's, if you boil it down into its simplest form, that's kind of how it happens. So
as a young man, maybe on the verge of manhood at about 13 years of age, you were introduced to these three demons about which you talk in your book, and ever since they've haunted you. Now, did you ever have a plan or an intention to pursue American history as an academic study, as a field professionally?
That's a good question. I went to West Virginia University a long time ago. I used to describe it as the 12 greatest years of my life. And I'm being facetious, but had more than a great time there. Majored in journalism, but I minored in history. And my other choice for a career long ago was to be, a history teacher in grade school or junior high, and I think I got smart and discovered that teachers unfortunately don't make a ton of money. Not that money was my driving. Journalists don't either, for the most part. Not that that was a driving influence, but I've always had a deep interest in history ever, since I was a kid. Particularly, my other obsession. I don't know how deep you want to go into this. Is the Kennedy assassination, JFK assassination in Dallas, and I've always been like the gamut. Like I remember going into, I tell my wife this, and we actually visited Morgantown, where West Virginia University is, and I pointed out the library, and I don't think she believed it, but there was one day I went into the library at like noon and was just reading history books. It ran the gamut on all kinds of topics. I left at like 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock.
Now,
Walked out.
in what year of your matriculation was this? Was this year 7, 8, 9?
Let's say 6 for grins, okay? Morgantown's an interesting place, Daniel. You have to, if you've never been, have you ever been to Morgantown, West Virginia?
I have not had the pleasure, but I do know that West Virginia University is either notorious or famous for its ability to hold a party.
Yes, I was there, and I want to preface this by saying I am not proud of this, okay? But I was there during the couch burning era when all that stuff started. And again, I don't want my kids to see this and think, oh my God, I can't believe their father did this. But I've seen many couch burnings, okay? And yes, the school was notorious for that. So yeah, anyway, where were we? I'm sorry, Daniel, go ahead. I don't mean to get off the beaten path here.
No, this is a fine digression.
Yeah.
So we talked about the fact that you pursued journalism always with this kind of latent curiosity and
Yes.
this passion, this afición for the Civil War. Now, during your recent course, or I would say your recent iteration as an author and a blogger, do you ever feel any tension between the academics and those who are aficionados?
That's a good question. That's a really, really good question. I don't view myself, I'm not a historian, okay? I'm a storyteller, and there's a difference, okay? From my standpoint, as a storyteller, you have to make it digestible for the average person, okay? You have to be able to tell a good story, okay? That's fundamental. If you want people to read your work, okay, you have to be a great storyteller. An historian or an academic, and this is not a blanket statement. There are some historians and academics that are really good at telling stories, but I don't know if their main mission is to be a storyteller. And I don't know if I'm making sense here, but a journalist, I see my role in the book that I did, A Civil War Road Trip of a Lifetime, is to tell stories and present some history too, a lot of history, in fact. So I think there's a fundamental difference, and I'm not saying that doing what a historian is and doing what I do are like one's better than the other. It's just to me, what being a storyteller, I think you have the ability to appeal to more people, I think. And so that kind of I think that kind of encapsulates where I'm coming from. So
Undoubtedly, and I do think that you succeed in that balance between storyteller and historian, or
yes,
quasi-historian in that book.
yes,
It's handled very adeptly, I think. There is, in the academic world, in that realm, a tendency toward being pedantic and unapproachable. And I
yes,
think a lot of the recent publications that have really struck a chord and have really resonated with people have been written by journalists who are doing great work in historical studies.
yes.
Just for you mentioned JFK, and recently I interviewed an excellent journalist and biographer by the name of Randy Taraborelli, and he's not a professionally trained historian. He began writing about Diana Ross and the Supremes and Motown, many decades ago, and he's sort of evolved into this expert biographer of the Kennedy family. And I can't think of any academic historian that is quite doing work that parallels with his. So I think it's absolutely great that those who are just aficionados are continuing to put out great work, as you are, both between your blog and your published work that's right here in front of me. So I definitely applaud you and encourage you and everybody else who is maybe tentative about entering or encroaching upon a field to which they maybe fear they don't belong, to do so and to put out that material, so long as it's well researched and has a certain afición, a certain passion behind it.
I like the tie to Hemingway and that word aficionado. Did you see the PBS special on Hemingway?
I did not. No, unfortunately. I know of it, though.
Yes.
Just recently, I actually just finished today writing an essay about Hemingway, and I'll have to send it to you. I really enjoyed doing it. I visited Key West with my father this past June.
Yes.
And of course, Hemingway spent, I think, basically the 30s, between 1931 and 1939,
Yes.
in Key West. And he has there still the Hemingway home. So I don't know if you've ever visited. If not,
No.
don't go in the summertime, but I strongly advise you to go in the winter, and the weather is balmy and beautiful. And it's such a magical experience to be where he lived, in this mansion, this Bahamian style 2-level yellow house that is absolutely picturesque. It's just beautiful in every way. And to think that this American icon every single day went out to his little detached writing room and published some of the most everlasting works in the American canon is just extraordinary. But no,
endlessly fascinating character.
Yeah.
Endlessly fascinating. Totally. Yeah. Yes. I need to go there.
Now, is he one of your favorite authors? Maybe we can talk about him for a minute.
I'm embarrassed to say that I almost exclusively, since I was a kid, have read nothing but nonfiction. And I don't know what that says about me, but as you know, Hemingway, I've probably read a little bit over the course of my life, was an absolutely fabulous writer. And, the craft of writing, I'm just scratching the surface. Like I'm way, 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 way down. What he accomplished and what he did. He was a newspaper reporter over during World War II, and I was so blown away by the PBS special, particularly about his experiences over covering World War II, and he covered. I believe he covered the prior to World War II was the fascist and the I believe nationalist in Spain. He covered that war. He's just so fascinating. So long way of saying I need to read more Hemingway.
And I think you really would thoroughly enjoy him because he as you said, was a reporter. He actually forewent college. He didn't go to any fancy university to burn down couches for 12
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
he,
yeah,
at the age of 18 or 19, I think his uncle worked at one of the local newspapers, got him a job. And like you said, that was his that well that it was from that experience that he developed his very unique staccato crisp
yes,
style. um,
yes,
he went on to work, like you said, for the Toronto Sun. He was deployed on assignment to Spain to cover the Spanish Civil War, out of which was born "For Whom the Bell Tolls," and he wrote that
yes.
later during his stay in Key West. And again, I'm very fresh on these details just because I just, like I said, just finished writing this essay about him. So, I'm not an expert on Hemingway. It's just very fresh in my mind. But I think you would especially like his short stories and his novels, just
Yes,
because he does almost exactly what you just described. As a journalist, as a reporter, he is
yes,
able to craft stories that are just so compelling but still feel like you're there with him as a witness to what he's just reporting back to you, with just
yes,
a little bit of color. He doesn't add too much. I mean, he almost totally forgoes the use of adjectives,
yes,
which he was advised to stray away from by Ezra Pound. So yeah,
yes.
it's a very journalistic style that I think you would really enjoy.
A marvelous eye for detail. I think absolutely. Yeah. I need now you're inspiring me. I need to go out and read some of Hemingway's works and add them to my shelves behind me that are 99.9% nonfiction. I'm embarrassed to say that as an American, it's terrible, but it's true.
as
So
an as an American, no, it's I don't
makes me
think
feel like a rube that I've said that. You know, here's this
no,
journalist who's never read a lot of, much of Hemingway. It's embarrassing.
no, it's no cause of embarrassment, especially because you have such a comprehensive understanding of the Civil War, and that's one thing that I wanted to discuss is your knowledge of even the most obscure, seemingly inconsequential battles is unparalleled. I don't think I've seen it in any other writer. So, how do you how do you discover the kind of the inherent fascination in these battles about which no one else really talks or knows?
That's a good question. I was heavily influenced by Ken Burns's uh, special on the Civil War, 91, I believe, 91 or 92. It was really terrific. And one of the things at the very beginning, historian David McCullough, popular historian David McCullough, who's from Pittsburgh, by the way, he said I can still hear his voice resonating in my ears, but he goes, the Civil War was fought in 10,000 places, from Tullahoma, Tennessee to the Fernandino coast, that was something like that in Florida. And I thought about that, and I think I told myself, I'm going to go see as many of these 10,000 places as I possibly can. And for the average person, like the Civil War is like Gettysburg and Antietam, Spotsylvania Courthouse and Cold Harbor, but there's 9,900 and whatever other places it was fought. And the Civil War is not just battles, okay? It's the story of slavery. It's the home front. There's all kinds of stories. But I initially started out being fascinated with these battles and being able to walk in the footsteps of people who were there and to stand on a rock where we know that X soldier died. So, here's an example, Daniel. On Saturday morning, my brother-in-law, he doesn't have any interest in history, which is fine. We drove 100 miles east of Nashville to White County, near Sparta. And we ride our, not motorcycles, road bikes, every weekend. And I said, let's start at France Cemetery. And that's where Champ Ferguson, the Confederate guerrilla, is buried. And he was hanged by the U.S. government for war crimes in 1865. But right down this remote road, the Monterey Highway, the Battle of Dug Hill was fought February 22nd, 1864. And in the book, I have not one, but two stories about this. And I go out there with a young man named, young to me. He's 28, 29. He might be 30 now, still young to me. His ancestor was probably there. But the Battle of it was actually a skirmish between U.S. Army cavalry and mainly Confederate guerrillas. But I went out there after my brother-in-law and I did our 30-mile bike ride. We went to and I'll get to my point. We went to the Calf Killer Brewery, had a beer. I had the Scorned Hooker IPA. It was really good. It was great. But then I met a state trooper there who's
I'm sorry. Hooker named after the general?
No, it's a Scorned. I don't know how they name their beers out there, but I give them credit for being colorful. But anyway, the main mission was to meet this 39-year-old state trooper who knew the nooks and crannies of the Battle of Dug Hill, and he took me all over the place back there. We were back in the woods, and we saw this old abandoned mansion from the 1920s, and he took me back to Confederate guerrilla Champ Ferguson's home site where he lived in the area, and he was living in that house when the U.S. government came to take him back to Nashville, where he had a trial and they eventually hanged him. But anyway, my point is that these obscure places hold, for me anyway, such a fascination. And, I was talking to a fellow author of mine. His name's, he's a friend of mine from Pittsburgh named Tom McMillan. He's written books about 9/11 and Civil War book, and he has another book out recently. And we were talking over beers in Boonesboro, Maryland, and I go, why do we do this? What's the reason? And I'm paraphrasing, but he had said something to the effect of being able to walk in the footsteps of these people is so fascinating and so intriguing and so interesting that you either get it or you don't get it. And obviously I get it. Okay. To me, it's so fascinating to be able to do this. So I've been to Picacho Pass in Arizona, supposedly the westernmost battle of the Civil War. I've been to Bryce's Crossroads and Champion Hill in Mississippi, and I've got a whole list of other places I want to go too. What was your original question? Did I go off the beaten path? Am I like deep in the woods here now, or what? Where's my wine getting to me? I don't know yet. So.
No, it's all good. It's all good. And you'll notice I'm talking a little bit. I'm sorry. Are you able to lower your volume maybe just a little bit?
I just did it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Apologies.
That's okay. I could hear myself giggling like a crazy man. I'll splice that little part out.
Okay.
And I'll just start right here. No, you haven't gone too far astray into the wilderness. My question was basically, of all these almost innumerable battles, most people, and it's somewhat saddening to discuss this point, but most people could maybe name you two battles. and they grace the cover of your book, actually, Antietam and Gettysburg. I think probably most people could get those two.
Yes.
But you, in your book, I like to fancy myself somewhat historically literate, but like you said, you were mentioning battles about which I had no idea, and
No.
about which I was fascinated to learn. So the question really was, and you answered it, was, um, how do you find the appeal in these very obscure battles and these little skirmishes? And maybe a follow-up question would be, do you ever kick yourself for having not known about them sooner? Do you sort of pride yourself on knowing, every little skirmish that occurred on this during this Continental War? Because that's truly what it was. It, like you said, from Arizona to Maryland, from Florida up to Massachusetts, and in Pennsylvania, there was action everywhere. It really was a continental conflict. So, what do you think about that?
I mean, first of all, you're flattering me by saying I know about every one of these little conflicts. I really don't. It's just that when I find an interesting one, I love digging in and finding out more. And here's an example. Outside of Richmond, Virginia, in 1864, I think I have the year right. Yeah, it might be 1865. I wrote about it in the book. The Battle of Newmarket Heights took place, and it was largely. What's interesting about this battle and the battlefield is that, and I think I have the number right. I write about it in the book. Is 14 U.S. colored troops earned the Medal of Honor for valor at the Battle of Newmarket Heights, and if they had pierced the Confederate defenses, and they had a shot, black troops could have been among the first troops to march into Richmond in 1865. Well, I went there twice. Once I went and I interviewed the descendant of one of the USCT troops who earned the Medal of Honor. And the descendant was Damon Radcliffe, just a super guy. We walked around Fort Harrison, where his ancestor ended up being based after the battle for a while. And then I was with Tim Talbot, who's deeply interested in the experience of black soldiers and slaves and the black experience during the Civil War, and many of these stories have been pushed into the margins of history. And I remember going after a very bad night's sleep at a sleazy flea bag hotel in Richmond, going out to meet Tim one morning, and we walked deep into the woods, and our first stop was the Confederate earthworks, which you can still see deep in the woods. It was an amazing experience, an otherworldly experience almost. And Tim turns to me and goes, "Is this remote enough for you?" And you see these earthworks deep in the woods, and I didn't know much about the Battle of Newmarket Heights, before I got there, but being there and being able to walk on that ground, to stand where the Texas Brigade fired on these black troops, and then to go 300 or 400 more yards in the woods down to this creek where the USCT formed up. That's an otherworldly experience. And being there, being able to walk the ground, inspired me to come back to Nashville, where we live, to learn more about it. And what my storytelling does, is I always like to have a present day character like Tim or Damon Radcliffe, who's a descendant of a U.S. colored troop soldier, as the vehicle to get into to tell the history of these places. And that was just an amazing, first of all, I've never sweat so much as I did at Newmarket Heights. In Richmond, we did it in August, which was insanely dumb. I mean, I can't tell you how dumb that was, but I traveled whatever 500 miles from Nashville to do that. But so my knowledge of these places that you may not have heard about, Daniel, or others is not, I don't have supreme knowledge of all these places, but when I find out a story that's interesting, like Newmarket Heights, where 14 USCT soldiers earned the Medal of Honor, that's fascinating. And what's interesting and sad to me is that, when we think about the Black experience during the Civil War, many people think of the movie Glory, right? Famous movie, tells the story of the 54th Massachusetts and Robert Gould Shaw. And who was the actor who played Robert Gould Shaw? You remember? Not Matt Damon. It was very famous. It'll come to me later. But a really famous movie about the Civil War. What Tim Talbot and I thought about as we're at Newmarket Heights is, why wasn't a movie made about the Battle of Newmarket Heights and these Black soldiers there?
I'm sorry, I'm just looking up the cast. Matthew Broderick, I think.
Matthew Broderick.
Yeah. I remember Denzel. I remember Denzel and Morgan Freeman. But yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Spot on. You nailed it. Thanks for coming up with that.
With a little Google assistance.
Yeah.
Now, just for clarification, for everyone out there listening, you said the USCT, and that stands for what?
United States Colored Troops. Toward the end of the war, Black regiments were formed, and originally they were used to black soldiers were built roads and did mundane tasks, and eventually the Lincoln and the United States government came around and used them as fighting troops, and they found out at Newmarket Heights and elsewhere that Black troops would fight bravely, and their stories, unfortunately, more of them need to be told. And that's why I have not one, but two stories about Newmarket Heights in my book. So,
and I think, if I recall correctly, there was a Battle of Newmarket Heights and a Battle of Newmarket. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's a good observation. They're often confused. The Battle of Newmarket was in the Shenandoah Valley, and I don't have the date in front of me. I believe it was in 1864, and I-81 the dreaded Devil's Highway, I-81, which I've traveled many times, unfortunately, and bisects the battlefield as it does many battlefields in the Shenandoah Valley. So I hate that road, Daniel. I hate it with a passion.
Yeah, during my time in Luray, I spent a brief while in Luray. I think I drove on more than a couple of times. But this leads me into another point, and that is the way in which the world has changed, and these environments, these battlefields, these places have undergone such alterations through these years, and it must be a little bit demoralizing to somebody like you who's trying to step upon or in the footsteps of those forebears who fought in these battles. So on your website, you have these remarkable images that display, when you hover over them and drag your cursor across, what the battlefield looked like in the past, as far back as the photography would allow you to see, and what it looks like today. So when you arrive at a location to find that a strip mall has been erected there, or there's a Waffle House where, allegedly the great event of this battle took place, how does that feel?
It destroys a little bit of your soul. I will preface that by saying, look, here's reality, okay? People have to live somewhere, okay? I get it. All right, I live in Nashville. I'm roughly 7 miles from Shies Hill, which was the left. And I'm not a left flank, right flank person, Daniel. It hurts my head. Um, but Shies Hill was the left flank of the Confederate Army at the Battle of Nashville on December 16th, 1864. I was at Shies Hill the other day to meet a friend to give him his Union Army bayonet back, believe it or not. And Shies Hill is ringed with houses now. And there's various reasons for that. But I think respectful development can take place. I think there are various organizations that have really led the charge in helping save battlefield land. The American Battlefield Trust is one of them. I'm on the board of the Save Historic Antietam Foundation, which is terrific. And I'm on the Battle of Nashville Trust Board too. But just to give you an example, for years, we used to, when I worked at ESPN, we used to take, vacation with my wife and girls and go down the equally dreaded I-95. And we'd slice through Virginia and we'd pass Fredericksburg. And for years, I couldn't get off at that exit because when you go down the old, what used to be the old plank road out past Salem Church, where a battle was fought, the Battle of Salem Church was fought in 1863. It's horrendous. It's nothing but Taco Bells, and that's not one of your sponsors, is it, by the way? Taco Bell and Battlefield. You need to get a sponsor. Battlefield Dentist, and then you see this church that was there at the time of the battle, Salem Church, and it's surrounded by this hodgepodge of urban schlock. As you go farther down the road, Battle of Chancellorsville took place, and you look to your right, there's a housing development. And the national park had, there's quite a bit of ground for the national park, but you have to weave through these housing developments to see some of this stuff. And, you go farther down the road, you have the wilderness, and, it's roughly the same experience. So to answer your question, it's soul sucking when it happens in what I consider a disrespectful way. And, this is hallowed ground. This is where Americans fought and died and had this, like, to me, the Civil War is the seminal experience. It's still resonating today, I think, obviously. And so I guess it's a long-winded way of saying it's soul-sucking. I wish it could be different in many places, but unfortunately it's not. And to the credit of many of these preservation organizations, much land has been saved, and that's gratifying to me. So,
yeah, it seems to me that we are distilling some lessons still today from the Civil War, but perhaps we're not taking a really comprehensive view of everything that happened. And I certainly don't think that our appreciation for how seismic an event it was is as it should be. Do you think that generally interest in the real history of the Civil War is waning? And perhaps even more broadly, do you think that interest in American history is kind of on the decline?
That's an interesting question. I will say this, I speak around, I'm going to be speaking in Charleston, South Carolina in October, other places. I will say that when I go to speak at these places, all the people are either look like me or they're older than I am. Okay. Occasionally you'll find, younger people there. So just anecdotally, I think younger people aren't as interested in that or in American history. And I think that's unfortunate. Who was the Sanayana, the philosopher? Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. I think it's one of my favorite quotes, and I think it's, what these events that happened during the Civil War throughout history, we can always use to help us plot a path forward. And if we're not learning about the Civil War and slavery and what life was like in the 1860s during this incredible event from 1861 to 1865, I think we're cheating the future, right? So I think it's unfortunate. I think the answer is yes. I don't think as many people care about it. And if you look at current events, politicians today, we all know the names. My blood pressure will go up talking about it, but you live in Florida, you know the story, right? I think that Kennedy and I'm paraphrasing, but JFK gave a speech, I think it was in 1962, to the Voice of America. I think it was the birth of the Voice of America, okay? And I'm paraphrasing, but he wanted the Voice of America to tell the story of America, warts and all. Okay, that's I wish I had the quote in front of me, but I'm a huge believer in that. We have to be able to confront our past, and slavery, civil rights, the assassinations of the '60s, all that stuff. We need to know about it, because you can trace many of the issues that are happening today in society to what happened from 1861 to 1865. I firmly believe in that. So,
yeah, and I would have to concur. It is heartening, though, to know that when you go to speak at these venues, they're well attended, or when you put out blog posts, they're well read and well received, or when you release a fine book like this, it has a good wide circulation. So that's why I really asked you that question, because in some ways you are on the ground floor and you're able to gauge the interest in this seminal event, this transformational event, whose repercussions, like you said, we're still feeling today. So I hope, to the younger viewers out there who are listening, that this conversation in some way stimulates your interest. You go out and get a book like John's and others, and maybe watch the Burns documentary, and maybe even visit some of these sites, of which, like you said, there are just so many. Speaking of all these battles, if you were able to transplant yourself back into history, and I'm sure you've thought about this, if you could select one battle in which you could have fought, what battle would that have been?
Oh man, that's a great question, but I know the answer right off the bat. Battle of Antietam, September 17th, 1862. I'd be in the 40-acre cornfield with the 16th Connecticut Rookie Regiment, first battle of the war. Didn't know what they were doing. Hadn't even fired the rifles in anger for the most part. The 40-acre cornfield is a rolling cornfield. They go up there. It's the afternoon. It's roughly 4:30. Out of the off Harper's Ferry Road come A.P. Hill's veterans, Confederate soldiers. They hit them in the left flank. Total chaos. And when we lived in Connecticut, I got to know these soldiers. I'd go to cemeteries and find their graves and dig into archives and pull out their pictures and find their stories and all kinds of stuff. And when I had a birthday, a big birthday several years ago, my wife, the lovely Mrs. B, who's a character in my book, she went there with me. And I told her, I said, Carol, when I'm gone, I want my ashes Show her a picture.
Oh, you keep talking. You continue.
I
I'll
told
find
her
it.
I want my ashes spread in the 40-acre cornfield. And I told her to please do not tell the National Park Service. I think you have to have
I think this is my favorite image in the book.
read the caption. Read the caption is the best.
I was cracking up when I when I read this. So it's Carol Banks' wife. The beloved Mrs. B keeps me laughing, and I am on the right.
Yeah. I have Daniel. I have a refined sense of humor.
Oh,
It comes from my days growing up in Pittsburgh, where I had my equally all our friends all my circle of friends, we became very adept at sticking it to one another, and it just carried over to the book. And I want to stress that this book, I have to be part salesman here. This is not a typical Civil War book. Okay, this is not a right flank, left flank book. This is about my experiences going to these places, meeting present day characters, and then highlighting. They all have this, many of them have this, what I call the Civil War death stare, in which you get them rolling on a topic and you can just see it in their eyes that this is important to them. And then I weave in bring in a sense of place, and that's my whole intent. And then tell a story. So
yeah,
anyway.
I think I'm witnessing that in your eyes right now.
Yeah, it could be the wine, and it could be the smoke coming. It could be the smoke coming from my candle.
From your Christmas candle. Yeah,
it's not illegal smoke. It's candle smoke. So
yeah, it's
anyway.
kosher. It's all kosher. But no, yeah, there's that glaze between the intersection of the three: the Civil War, the wine, and the Yankee candle. The Yankee candle, good choice for this.
Yes, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. Yankee candle.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. That's awesome.
I think to our southern friends there, you might consider it a more neutral aroma.
Next time I'll get Confederate candle or something like that. Nathan Bedford Forest candle.
Yeah, maybe have some Southern comfort for a drink and a Yankee candle.
Although I don't touch that stuff anymore, Daniel.
Okay. Well, now
had a bad experience we'll save that for another podcast.
from the West Virginia days, perhaps?
No, it was from. We'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
A recent historical event. We'll just let that go.
All right, and a more historical event. If you could fight under any general on either side, Confederate, Rebel, or Yankee Union, under whom would you want to have fought?
I'm going to say the Sledge of Nashville, George Thomas, a native Virginian who stayed loyal to his country. And, he led troops here at the Battle of Nashville in December 1864. Much to admire about him, a native Virginian who stayed loyal to his country. And there were many others, Southerners who stayed loyal to the United States too. So I deeply admire him. The anniversary of the Battle of Chickamauga was yesterday. He led a stand at Snodgrass Hill at Chickamauga. So, and I may be there on Sunday on my way back from the University of Alabama Georgia game. I've been invited to go to the game down there. I think I'm going to stop there, and I'll pay my respects to George Thomas. I'll raise a glass of something, not Southern Comfort, something else. Maybe a beer, an IPA.
Yeah, you should raise the Hooker IPA, named after Joseph Hooker, of course. As an adopted Tennessean, maybe just very briefly, you can comment on the peculiarity of that state during the Civil War, because it was geographically it's a southern state. Of course, it is the home to a certain 17th president, and the first to have been impeached. Tell us a little bit about Tennessee's role in the Civil War, just briefly.
Sure, that's an interesting question, and you're referencing Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln. Interesting state. Tennessee sent more uh, soldiers to the served in the Union Army than any other Southern state. The eastern part of the state, which was more mountainous and thus people didn't have a need for slaves nor an inclination for some of them. Most of them came from the eastern part of the state. Where I'm from, in this area right here, slavery was very prevalent. In fact, just down the road are probably 3 miles away are two remaining slave cabins. If you go a little bit farther, there's two other slave cabins. So this area where I'm at, slavery was prevalent, and this area for the most part was sent many soldiers to the Confederate Army.
As much as you are a Civil War aficionado and chronicler of battles, you're also a road tripper, apparently an indefatigable road tripper, capable of traversing many hundreds, if not thousands of miles with little more than a little cup of coffee and a song on the radio.
Totally.
So what are your methods of entertainment while driving these long distances? Are you a audio books type of person? Do you like podcasts? Is it just strictly music? Or are you just alone with your thoughts? What do you do while driving to divert your attention from the road?
Sometimes I'm alone with my thoughts, but I crank the radio loud. I mean, really loud. Pearl Jam. Creedence Clearwater Revival. I love them. Love them. They're so great. Sometimes I'll put on Civil War talk radio. Excellent podcast. I'll be on there December 6th, by the way, with Jerry Prokopovich. He's great. I love him. He kept me going. I pack away lots of red licorice, some tea, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and I have long haul trucker in my DNA, and there is like Daniel. I started out in Gettysburg, like I was interviewing Ron Palm, who's a collector of Civil War images. He's in the book, an amazing guy, from Western Pennsylvania, so you know he can't be a bad guy. But I was in Gettysburg that morning, interviewed him for a couple hours, and then drove all the way back to Nashville, and I just rock and roll. So the key to success on a road trip, not just a Civil War road trip, at least for me, red licorice, a big bag of red licorice. Pack a little tea, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I know a Civil War collector named Robert, who's a retired doctor, who, when he goes to Civil War shows to buy artifacts, he packs like 500 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because he doesn't want to spend money on dining anywhere. He wants it all to go to buying Civil War relics. But yeah, red licorice, peanut butter jelly sandwiches, tea, and have some long haul trucker in your DNA. Not everybody can do that. I am supremely gifted. So
no, and certainly not on that diet. Not everybody can do that. And
you got to power through it.
You talk about that in the book. You talk about the red licorice.
Yes.
In the sandwiches. So of course I had to ask. I'm surprised that it's not beef jerky. It's something a little.
Oh no.
Less perishable. You're going with things that have the potential to spoil. So hopefully, well, maybe not the licorice, but
I'm in good shape, so I don't worry about consuming a bag of 50 licorice sticks. I'll just either walk it off, or a lot of these trips I'll bring my bike and I'll bike it off. So I don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and sometimes you gotta 4 hours sleep. You gotta be strong.
Yeah.
I had a writer who worked with at ESPN. He says, I can sleep when I die. And that's kind of my mentality. So,
Well, that it turns us back to the point with which we began this conversation. Your
yes,
insomniac tendencies might
yes.
have something to do with the copious amounts of red licorice you're consuming during the day.
I
No,
need
but
you as my, you need to
I,
be my psychiatrist,
I don't
probably.
know. I don't know if even I can counteract the effects of your road trip menu.
Yes.
Uh, do you prefer the pull apart licorice or the traditional licorice that you just bite
Oh,
on?
it's you get the big bag and you just pull those suckers apart. And I eat like 20 at a time. I mean, it's shameful. It really is. It's disgusting. But we should talk Civil War eats before we conclude here too,
I think
because
so.
I have on my blog a list of my favorite Civil War eats place. If you want to go there, if you don't want to go there, I understand.
No, I want to go everywhere that you've mentioned, to be completely honest. And I want to visit all these wonderful people whom you've interviewed. There are some interesting characters here, and again, that's I get why the book is so compelling, because, like you said, it's not just talking about battlefield formations and strategy and
Yes.
tactics. You're drawing in these personalities from the modern age, and some of them are. It's I always find the contrast so striking when you take an image from 1864. You have President Lincoln standing with McClellan and a lot of the staff surrounding him, and there's such gravitas to their posture, and everybody always strikes a certain pose. You'll see this in the mid 19th century. It's like almost a dandyish approach to photography. The men
Yes.
always they'll always stand akimbo, or they'll with one
Yes.
hand on the waist, or they'll have one foot up on a fence pole, or there's a real theatricality to it, and I love that about the early age of photography. And then with us, it's like just a guy in sweatpants with his shirt tucked in, with
Yeah.
white socks and loafers, and it's like there's no offense to the sartorial choices of the modern day, but there's just
Absolutely.
something so regal and
Totally.
powerful about those old images that I love.
Well, I intentionally, I shot all the pictures for the book, and I intentionally shot almost every character in the book the same way, looking askance, and that was intentional. You see that in a lot of Civil War photography, uh, portrait photography, and I collect Civil War soldier photos, um, and so that was intentional to kind of give you that Civil War type feel. Enjoyed doing that.
Yeah. On that point, let me ask you, what is your favorite image from the book, of all the people that you photographed and all of the past images that you included from the mid 19th century? Which did you like most?
There's a couple. Sid Champion at uh, Champion Hill Battlefield in Mississippi, rural Mississippi. His great grandparents, great, I think I have that right. Great grandparents owned the plantation that was the vortex of the battle, and he and I, on a really hot day, on the anniversary of the battle, May 16th, 1863, I believe. I was there on the anniversary. He's just a character. We're on what's called the Hill of Death, and I posed him there, and the battlefield is deeply meaningful to him. As an aside, when he was a kid, well, maybe a little older than a kid, maybe 19, he and his buddies would go to the Hill of Death, take a sled. They'd have a few alcoholic beverages in them, and they would slide down the Hill of Death in some fashion. So the picture of him in the book it brings back really good memories. And then there's an image of my close friend Richard Clem, 82 years old, the Babe Ruth of storytellers, and I posed him on the old Otho J. Smith farm. It was a U.S. Army hospital in the aftermath of the Battle of Antietam, and I posed him on the site where he found an ID disc for a Vermont soldier who was mortally wounded at the Battle of Antietam. He's a relic hunter, and he found his ID disc there. And I posed him right on that site. And Richard is just a superior human being. And whenever I see that picture of him, it brings back a lot of fond memories for me.
Yeah. And like I said, a lot of the imagery in this book is striking, and really gives life to the narrative that you're trying to tell and that you succeed in telling. But I couldn't but notice more than a couple pictures in which you're seen to be wearing a West Virginia University hat and an Alabama University hat. You mentioned that you're going to be in attendance at the upcoming Alabama game. So I have to ask, to which school do you pledge your allegiance? I know the Crimson Tide are certainly in need of some moral support this
Yes. Well, it should be noted that the game I'm going to on Saturday is the Alabama Birmingham at Georgia game.
Oh.
So note that. Yeah. I don't know. It's hard to say right now. There's some things going on at my alma mater that I'm not real happy with. So we'll just pick another topic for now.
Well, the other topic that I desperately want to discuss with you, but I think we should maybe shelve for the next time that we are together, is the JFK assassination. But it's, I think, too deep a topic to delve into at this time.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yeah, that's a rabbit hole. I know a lot about it, though, and have been interested in it for a long, long time. That was my other obsession for a while as a kid. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I could tell you a lot of stories. Yeah, and having worked at the Dallas Morning News for almost 22 years, and right down the street from Dealey Plaza, and having access to a lot of people in the archives, and
it's a rabbit hole into which I'd be very willingly led by you.
I'll take you there. We can save that for the next podcast if you're interested in that. I'd be happy to. Behind me on the shelf is a copy when I was 15, 16 years old. This is in the 70s. I got a copy of the Zapruder film, a bootleg copy. We can talk about that and how I got it.
I hope to do that. I want to leave you though with one prompt, maybe one setup on which you can comment just briefly, if possible.
Sure.
And I say this because I just read it today, and it struck me as particularly relevant to our conversation. An article published in Vanity Fair on the 9th of September, in anticipation of former Secret Service agent Paul Landis's forthcoming book, Final Witness, states, and I'm quoting here, Landis spotted a bullet resting on the top of the back of the seat of the vehicle. He says he picked it up, put it in his pocket, and brought it into the hospital. Then, upon entering trauma room number 1, he insists he placed the bullet on a white cotton blanket on the president's stretcher. The article's author concludes that Landis's story, for several reasons, is not just possible, it in fact makes more sense than the core finding of the Warren Commission, known as the single bullet theory. So perhaps I'm wrong to introduce what is a very large topic at this point as we conclude this episode, but what do you think about that passage excerpted from a Vanity Fair article?
Yeah, I read the entire piece, so I'm very familiar with it. If true, it's a game changer. You have to know the intricacies of the assassination to understand the importance of that, what he said there. I've got a lot of questions about that, but we can save that for down the road. before we descend into a rabbit hole from which we may not be able to come up for air again. So this could turn into a 3-hour podcast. I don't know if you want to go there.
Understood.
But it's a very fascinating piece.
Understood.
And the man, Paul Landis, the Secret Service agent, seems very credible. So
to my assessment, he does seem to be a credible guy. Quite
yes.
I guess the question is why he waited so long, these decades to. Right.
Yeah.
And the author of the article, he does address that.
Yes.
And again, I have to apologize for throwing that line out into the water, sort of pulling it back.
I will always talk about that topic. Plus, we can talk about my partial day spent at the Lee Harvey Oswald's rooming house in Oak Cliff with the granddaughter of the woman who rented the room to him. I'd love to tell the story of that.
Yeah, I would love to hear it. And I think my favorite image of yours is probably you in
Oswald's
room with your foot on the bed stretched out. The only thing better would have been a bag of licorice by your side. So
next time I'll do that. So you should have loonies like me on every podcast.
Oh, I'd be honored. John, with that, is there any final message with which you'd like to leave our audience today?
Buy the book. All the money goes to Mrs. B. I think I'll leave you with this. History is important. Okay, the Civil War history in particular. It's not just the battles and who fought where and all that type of stuff. Everything, the causes of it, the reasons for it, slavery, all that stuff is important. To me, it's the most interesting 5 years in our nation's history. It resonates today in many, many different ways. So I encourage people, it's not just, like I said, it's not just the battles. It's a lot of stuff. And it's hard to get your arms around it. But it's endlessly fascinating to me. The people who lived during the era are fascinating. And all their stories resonate today. And again, the book is not a right flank, left flank book. It's part travelogue, part memoir, part history, and give it a whirl. So
very eloquently put, succinctly put, and I second everything that you said. Get yourself a big pack of licorice, settle down with this book. You'll read it, and I guarantee that you'll enjoy it. And also, after you do so, be sure to visit John's blog, on which there's a multitude of great articles and opinion pieces. It's just really a joy to read. Like I said, you have this wonderful combination of erudition, of deep knowledge, and also of wit and humor. And I love that mixture of the two. It really makes for a fine reading experience. So John, again, nice. Of course. And
very nice of you to say that.
Of course. And I mean it sincerely. And I have to thank you with equal sincerity for joining me today, for giving me so much of your time. Again, we could talk ad infinitum about some of these topics, and I hope to have you back again, especially to talk about the JFK assassination and some other topics that might be on your mind.
Danger zone.
And any other conspiracy that I think might be worth covering or uncovering.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me. This has been very interesting, and for me it was thought provoking. So I need to run out and get a Hemingway book now. So
yeah. So that's the whole idea, to have a thought provoking conversation, a stimulating one, an entertaining one, and you certainly provided the entertainment and the enlightenment today. To all the viewers out there, the listeners, the friends of mine who have joined me on this little platform and on this journey, please do consider checking out John's his sites, buy his book, and please don't hesitate to subscribe to this channel and continue to help it grow. And with that, I fare thee all well from Finneran's Wake.